The ridicule Earth had always been laughed at by the great empires of the galaxy. To most, it was just another backwater planet, struggling to survive in the dark corners of space. The Draconians, the most powerful and feared empire in the galaxy, were no exception. They saw Earth as weak, primitive, and insignificant. A planet of no real value, and they realized they had made a grave mistake. For centuries, the Draconians had sent their war fleets to Earth, each time with the same goal: to remind humanity of its place. Their ships would land in Earth's skies, and their soldiers would march down to cities, performing cruel acts just to show their power. They mocked humanity's pathetic defenses, their weak technology, and their poor understanding of the universe. Every time, the Draconians left Earth in ruin, with nothing more than a smirk on their faces as they returned to the stars. Humanity had always been the underdog, always fighting to survive. But that was about to change. In the quiet corners of Earth, away from the Draconians' gaze, humans had been preparing. In secret, hidden in the mountains and deep underground bunkers, Earth's greatest minds had been working on a plan to turn the tables. They had learned from each defeat, each humiliation, and they had developed new technology, new weapons, and new strategies. But no one knew exactly when the Draconians would come again. Earth's governments were still in disbelief, still convinced that their planet was too weak to challenge the mighty Draconians. But a few believed otherwise. The latest report from the Draconian Empire was chilling. Their scouts had detected strange activity around Earth. Something was changing. Earth's old satellites were showing patterns they hadn't seen before. Technology beyond human understanding was being developed at a pace that didn't fit the timeline they had predicted. What worried the Draconians the most was the fact that they couldn't identify any of it. The mysterious energy readings coming from Earth made no sense, but their arrogance was too great, and their focus was too narrow. They believed it was just a fluke, a sign of human weakness, not strength. Meanwhile, on Earth, a secret meeting was being held by world leaders, military commanders, and scientists. The time had come. For years, they had watched the skies, hoping for an opportunity. Now, they were ready to act. The weapons they had developed in secret were unlike anything Earth had ever seen. New technologies that could potentially turn the tide of war. But would it be enough to stop the Draconians? One leader, General Samantha Clark, stood before the room, her face tense with determination. "We have no choice," she said firmly. "If we do nothing, they'll come again, and we'll be crushed, like before. But if we act now, we can show them just how far we've come." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. There was no going back now. At that moment, the communication system buzzed to life. A transmission from Earth's deep space monitoring station had just come through. A few words, barely audible, crackled through the speaker. "The Draconians are coming, but they won't expect what's waiting for them." The room exploded into a mix of excitement and fear. The Draconians were already on their way, and this time, they wouldn't be greeted with a weak, helpless planet. This time, Earth was ready. On the Draconian flagship, Lord General Korvac stood at the command center, staring out at the stars. His cold, reptilian eyes narrowed as he examined the data on the screen. Earth's response had come sooner than expected, but he dismissed it with a scoff. The Draconians had crushed Earth's feeble resistance time and time again. What made this time any different? "Send the fleet," he ordered, his voice sharp and confident. "Earth will be taught a lesson once again. Prepare the invasion force." His commanders nodded and began to make the necessary preparations. As the mighty Draconian fleet moved into position, the engines of their warships hummed with power, and thousands of soldiers geared up for what they believed would be a simple Operation One More Victory to add to their endless list of conquests. But, unknown to them, the quiet planet they had ridiculed had prepared a surprise. Humanity had done the unthinkable. The world's best scientists, engineers, and military leaders had joined forces to develop something so advanced, so powerful, that the Draconians would have no idea how to respond. At the heart of this new weapon was an energy source so advanced, so volatile, that it could disrupt even the most sophisticated Draconian technology. But the weapon had a secret. It would only work if the Draconians believed they were facing nothing more than another easy victory. The humans needed them to think they were still the weak, helpless creatures they had always been. The weapon had to be unleashed at the perfect moment when the Draconians were already at Earth's doorstep, ready to strike. The moment arrived. The Draconian fleet entered Earth's atmosphere, and General Korvac's voice boomed across the command deck. "Prepare for landing. Earth will surrender in a matter of hours." But as the first wave of Draconian ships descended, something strange happened. The sensors began to flicker, the readings going haywire. Korvac gripped his armrests, eyes wide with confusion. "What is this? What's happening?" he demanded. The fleet's systems, once flawless, began to malfunction. Ships dropped from the skies, spiraling into the atmosphere as their engines failed. The mighty Draconian fleet, proud, untouchable, was suddenly crippled. It didn't take long for the Draconians to realize that they were facing something far worse than they could have imagined. Humanity had not just been ridiculed, had been preparing, and now the time for ridicule was over. The Draconian fleet moves the Draconian fleet. Once unstoppable, now trembled in the cold void of space. Lord General Korvac paced the command deck of his flagship, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding. Before him, his mind raced. How could Earth, the backward planet, have come up with such a weapon? How could they have done this without warning? They had been so sure, so confident that their advanced technology would make any resistance laughable. But now their ships were powerless, spinning out of control as if someone had flipped a switch. "What's the status on the rest of the fleet?" Korvac barked, his voice cold and demanding. "Sir, it's happening across all ships. The engines, the communication systems, they're failing. There's a strange interference. It's as if something is blocking us from accessing our primary systems," reported his second-in-command, Lieutenant Vrex, his voice shaky. Korbac's fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't a malfunction. This was something else. Earth had managed to do what no one thought possible. They had turned the tables. Across the galaxy, the Draconian High Command had already been informed of the situation. Their response was swift and brutal. Send reinforcements. Bring in the advanced strike forces. It was their usual approach when faced with an enemy that was too dangerous to ignore. They crushed it before it could rise again. But this time, there was no one to crush. The Draconian fleet, the mightiest force in the universe, was helpless against whatever Earth had unleashed. On Earth, General Samantha Clark and her team watched the live transmissions from space. Their faces were lit by the glow of the monitor, their expressions a mix of triumph and disbelief. The first phase of their plan had worked. The Draconian ships were vulnerable, lost in space without the ability to coordinate. But this was only the beginning. "We need to strike now. We can't let them regroup," General Clark said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. Her team nodded. This was a moment the world had waited for, a moment to prove that humanity wasn't the weak, helpless species the Draconians had believed them to be. With the fleets incapacitated, the next step was to secure Earth's dominance. But there was still a question that loomed over them all. What had caused the Draconian ships to fail so spectacularly? As they analyzed the data, it became clear it wasn't just a weapon. It was a series of interconnected technologies, a quantum disruption system that had been developed over the years in secret. A system that could jam any form of Draconian technology and turn their greatest strength into their biggest weakness. "This is bigger than we thought," Clark muttered, looking at the holographic map. "We have to act fast, or they'll figure out how to fight back." But Korvac wasn't the type to give up easily. In the dark void of space, the Draconian fleet was in turmoil. While Korvac's flagship struggled to regain control, smaller scout ships had been dispatched to investigate the anomaly. The scout ship's sensors picked up strange energy signatures coming from a point in the asteroid belt just beyond Earth's orbit. It was a bizarre discovery, an invisible force field, blocking their view and disrupting their scans. "It's a trap," Korvac muttered, barely able to contain his anger. "Send a team to investigate. We will find out what this is, and we will eliminate it." But as the scout ships moved closer to the anomaly, a horrifying realization began to settle in. One by one, their ships began to disappear from the radar, vanishing into the strange energy field. The Draconians couldn't comprehend what was happening. Was this Earth's doing? Were they really that far ahead? The answer came in the form of a single, chilling transmission. It was a message from Earth One that would send a ripple of terror through the entire Draconian Empire. "Your fleets are gone, Korvac. You've underestimated us for too long. We will never be your slaves. Consider this your warning." Korvac's face twisted in rage as he stared at the message, but there was little he could do. His fleet was crippled. The once mighty empire was on the brink of collapse. And now Earth was making its move. The Draconians sent a desperate plea for help, but deep down they knew that this was no ordinary battle. They were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered back on Earth. The human resistance prepared for what was coming next. The Draconians would regroup, they knew that. But Earth's leaders also knew that their window of opportunity was closing. The Draconians were not a race to be underestimated. They would strike back, and when they did, Earth needed to be ready. But for now, the humans held the advantage. They had done the impossible. They had struck fear into the heart of the galaxy's most powerful empire, showing them that humanity was no longer the weak prey they had once believed. Earth was no longer the victim of ridicule. As the humans watched the sky, they knew the next step would be even more critical. They couldn't afford to let the Draconians recover. Their victory had only just begun. The Draconian fleet had been defeated, humiliated, and scattered in mere hours. But as Korvac and his commanders scrambled to regain control, they understood. Something Earth had just changed the rules of the game. The once vulnerable planet had outsmarted them, and now the galaxy was watching. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a blow to the very foundation of Draconian superiority. And while Earth's victory had been quick, the Draconians now understood that the war for the future had only just begun. The next battle would be the one that determined who truly ruled the galaxy. The vanishing the galaxy held its breath as the Draconian fleet struggled to regain control. The unexpected failure had left them stunned and vulnerable. What had been a sure victory was now slipping through their claws like sand. The Draconian warships, once the symbols of their unchallenged dominance, were scattered across the stars like broken toys, their engines flickering with dying embers. Lord General Korvac stood frozen in disbelief in the heart of his flagship's command center. His eyes were wide with fury as his fingers gripped the cold metal of the command table. His fleet was crippled, and Earth of all places had managed to do the impossible. The Draconians had underestimated them for centuries, but never again would they make that mistake. We are being hunted, Korvac finally muttered, his voice thick with dread. His crew looked at each other in uncertainty, unsure of how to respond. The once mighty warlord, who had struck fear into the hearts of countless species, now felt a creeping terror. Earth had something they could not understand, a power beyond their comprehension. As the Draconian commanders scrambled to re-establish control, the truth of their defeat began to sink in. Every fleet, every ship, and every soldier had been scattered. In a matter of hours. No explosions, no debris, no battle cries. They had simply ... vanished. Earth had erased them from existence with terrifying efficiency. There were no signs of battle, no wreckage, nothing. Then came the transmission. A voice, low and haunting, crackled through the communication channels. It was from Earth, a message that would haunt Korvac for the rest of his life. Do you still think we are weak, Korvac? You have been warned. You will never again underestimate humanity. The transmission cut off, leaving only a ringing silence. Korvac felt his chest tighten, his mind racing. What had they done? How had they done it? Back on Earth, General Samantha Clark and her team stood in the war room, watching as the last remnants of the Draconian fleet fell silent. Their victory had been swift, unexpected, and far beyond what anyone had imagined. But there was no time to celebrate. They knew that the Draconians would not stay down for long. Earth had only one chance to prove its strength and survive as a free planet. This isn't over, Clark said, her voice sharp with determination. They'll come back stronger. We have to prepare for what comes next. But the victory was sweet, and it wasn't lost on humanity. Across the planet, there was a ripple of disbelief and joy. For the first time in history, Earth had stood up to one of the galaxy's most powerful empires and won. No one had expected the humans to succeed. No one had believed that they could even put up a fight. But the Draconians were gone, vanished. How long do we have? Asked one of the scientists in the war room, his voice trembling. The question hung in the air like a cold wind. We don't know, Clark replied, but I promise you we won't waste this chance. In the days that followed, Earth's leaders and military forces began to regroup. They worked quickly, mobilizing everything they had. Their greatest fear was that the Draconians would return with an even greater force, their anger fueling a campaign of vengeance that could obliterate Earth in an instant. But they had learned from their victory. They now knew what it took to outsmart the Draconians. Meanwhile, far from Earth, the Draconians scrambled for answers. Their most skilled engineers and scientists worked around the clock, attempting to understand the inexplicable phenomenon that had destroyed their fleets. But the more they searched, the less they understood. Earth had somehow managed to manipulate space itself. It was a power they had never encountered, one that struck at the very core of Draconian technology. No one could explain it. Lord General Korvac was haunted by the faces of his fallen soldiers, by the wreckage that could never be recovered. He had failed them, failed his entire empire. Earth had done something no one had thought possible, and now the entire galaxy knew it. "Prepare the fleet," Korvac ordered coldly, his eyes narrowing in fury. "We will rebuild. We will return, and when we do, Earth will burn." It wasn't just a promise, it was a vow. The Draconians would return, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim their pride. The defeat was only temporary, but something else lingered in Korvac's mind. As his fleet began to regroup, he couldn't shake the feeling that Earth's victory hadn't been random. It was deliberate. There was something more, something Earth had been hiding, something far greater than the Draconians had ever imagined. Back on Earth, the truth of the humans' victory was becoming clearer. General Clark had been right, the Draconians would return, and this was far from over. But Earth had a new sense of confidence. The humans had done what no one had ever expected. They had erased an entire fleet from the galaxy, leaving no trace behind. And that power, that unimaginable power, was now theirs. They had fought back, and they had won. But in the victory, they had also gained something more: respect. Earth was no longer a planet to be mocked. The Draconians would soon realize this. In the vast reaches of space, as the Draconian ships began to regroup and rebuild, the silence of Earth's victory reverberated across the galaxy. Earth had done what was once thought impossible. They had defied the most powerful empire in the universe. But as the Draconians plotted their return, the question remained: how long could humanity hold on to their victory before the wrath of the Draconians fell upon them once more? And Earth, in its quiet resilience, waiting for the storm that would come again, but knowing that they had the power to face whatever came next. The aftermath of Galaxy had never seen a moment like this. The news of the Draconian fleet's disappearance spread like wildfire, igniting whispers and rumors across countless worlds. Earth, once the butt of the galaxy's cruelest jokes, had achieved the impossible. A planet of seemingly primitive beings had outsmarted the Draconian Empire, vanishing their fleets without a trace. And yet, as awe spread throughout the galaxy, there was no time to savor the victory. The aftermath of this unprecedented event would shape the fate of humanity forever on Earth. General Samantha Clark stood at the helm of the largest war command. Center on the planet, the monitors before her flickered with images of the Draconian fleet's last known positions. The once proud armada had dissolved into the void, leaving behind only debris and silence. The enormity of what they had achieved still hadn't fully hit Earth's leadership. They had turned the tide of a war that wasn't even supposed to be winnable. But Clark knew better than anyone else. This was only the beginning. Earth's newfound power was like a double-edged sword. The Draconians would not forget their humiliation. They would return, and when they did, they would be even more merciless than before. "We've done the impossible, but we can't afford to get complacent," Clark said, her voice steady as she addressed her staff. "The Draconians won't stop until they get what they want. We need to prepare for what's coming next." Her words weighed heavily on everyone in the room. The humans had done what no one believed they could. But now, Earth was on the radar of every major empire in the galaxy. The victory over the Draconians had shaken the very foundation of galactic politics. What would other species think? Would they see Earth as a new ally or a threat to be neutralized? Far from Earth, the Draconian Empire was in turmoil. Lord General Korvac had returned to Draconian space, his personal humiliation burning deeply in his mind. Every day he spent in his war chambers, staring at the shattered remnants of his fleet, was a reminder of his failure. The Draconians had been invincible for centuries. They had crushed empires, burned entire planets to the ground. Yet here they were, nursing their wounds, unable to comprehend the loss. Korvac had already issued orders for the reconstruction of their fleets, pulling together every available resource. But this wasn't just a matter of rebuilding their ships. It was a matter of restoring their pride. The Draconians could not be seen as weak. They had to reassert their dominance. "We must return," Korvac's voice growled as he addressed the Draconian High Command. "Earth thinks it has one. They have no idea what's coming." The high-ranking officials surrounding him exchanged uneasy glances. Korvac's anger was palpable, but there was something else in his eyes: fear. For the first time in his career, Korvac wasn't sure how to win. Earth had thrown the Draconians' might back in their face. They had challenged an empire that had once been untouchable. "We will return, and when we do, Earth will not survive. I will personally ensure their destruction," Korvac continued, his words icy with wrath. But deep down, he understood the truth. This was no longer a simple invasion. The Draconians would have to come at Earth with everything they had and more. Back on Earth, a strange calm had settled over humanity. There was an underlying feeling of unity, a recognition that they were no longer just the fragile species they once were. The leaders of Earth knew that they had to act quickly to prepare for the inevitable Draconian retaliation. Earth's defenses, while impressive, were still in their infancy compared to the overwhelming might of the Draconian Empire. But the humans had one advantage. They had forced the Draconians to retreat. They had earned their place in the galaxy. "I've seen the reports. The Draconians will be back. They'll be stronger, smarter, and angrier," said Admiral Rachel Hayes, standing before a large holographic map of the galaxy. "But this time, they won't have the element of surprise. We'll be ready." Samantha Clark looked at her fellow leaders, all of whom bore the same determined expression. They were no longer hiding. They were no longer weak. Earth had not only survived, it had struck fear into the hearts of those who had once dismissed it. And now it had to prepare for the war that was coming. "Prepare every ship. Deploy all our forces," Clark commanded. "We're going to show the galaxy that Earth is no longer a place to be feared. The Draconians may have underestimated us once, but they won't make that mistake again." But in the quiet spaces between the Earth's leaders and commanders, there was one nagging thought. What had the Draconians learned from their defeat? Earth had shown its power, but the Draconians were not easily defeated. They were a force of unimaginable will and cruelty. Would the next battle be the one that destroyed humanity once and for all? In the far reaches of the galaxy, a new alliance was forming. Other alien species, once distant observers, were now keenly interested in the events unfolding on Earth. Some were curious, others were fearful, but all knew one thing: the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. Aboard the flagship of a neutral alliance, an alien diplomat watched the news unfold, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Earth has done what no one thought possible," the diplomat mused, his voice low. "They've challenged the Draconians and won. But for how long? The galaxy may be witnessing the birth of a new power." The diplomat turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to Earth. We are interested in an alliance. We would like to learn more about their strength." Across the galaxy, many others were sending similar messages. Earth had proven itself. The question was no longer whether they could survive, was whether they would emerge as a new force in the galaxy, or whether they would fall under the weight of the Draconian Empire's wrath. Back on Earth, General Clark stood before her window, looking out over the bustling cityscape. She could see the signs of change everywhere. Humans were working together like never before. They had proven they could survive, that they could fight back. But the war was far from over. The Draconians would come again, stronger, angrier, and with more firepower than Earth had ever faced. The weight of it all settled on her shoulders, but she refused to show fear. Earth had won this battle, but the war was just beginning. And for the first time, she believed Earth had a real chance of winning the galaxy's respective. They could survive the next storm. As the Draconians began their painful rebuilding, their plans for vengeance formed in the darkest corners of their war council. The galaxy had seen the wrath of Earth, but the Draconians were about to show the universe that no one, not even a world that had humiliated them, could escape their vengeance. The storm was coming, and Earth would have to prepare for the battle of its life.